Hey, what's up, everyone? I wanted to get into something pretty exciting for all of you who've been spending countless hours in Total War Warhammer 3. Patch 7.1 rolled out with a big focus on squashing bugs, fixing weird behaviors, and tightening up some balance issues across multiple factions. Now, the first thing the team mentions in the opening of the patch notes is that this update is all about bug fixes and quality of life improvements. And that's something I think a lot of players were hoping for after the massive content drop back in Update 7.0 with Tides of Torment and the Mask of Slaanesh. They've cleaned up a ton of the little niggles that could interrupt your flow, from campaign crashes to weird UI behavior that just didn't feel right. It's the kind of update that doesn't necessarily add flashy new mechanics, but makes the whole experience feel more polished and less likely to throw an unexpected curveball at you. In the campaign itself, the patch notes start right off with some general fixes that affect all players. One of the big ones here was a multiplayer crash that could happen when you started a game with the dwarf factions, which is definitely something that was causing a lot of frustration for people trying to play co-op with their friends. They also fixed an issue where certain mounts, specifically demonic steeds, weren't available to characters when playing with some of the Chaos Warriors factions. That might have seemed minor to some, but if you're building around cav-heavy strategies, not having your mounts available can throw off your whole game plan. There were also fixes for some odd behaviors that would happen when you were juggling recruitment and movement. For instance, if you depleted an army's movement, then started recruitment and saved and loaded the game before canceling it, the patch now stops that from fully restoring movement points unfairly. And something that players who like to manage their buildings and diplomacy together will appreciate is the fix, where rushing a building while you had the diplomacy panel open could cause a hard lock. So long as the diplomacy interface is open, the rush action is now ignored to avoid freezing your game. Every faction gets a few specific fixes as well, and this is where the depth of this patch really shines through. Take the Dark Elves, for example. More followers are now available to heroes like the Drushi Anointed, which gives you better flexibility if you're running a more hero-centric army composition. And Lokir's Winds of Magic power bar now shows up correctly, so you actually know when you're ready to cast those spells. Over with the High Elves, there were a bunch of really comprehensive fixes. Imric's dragon encounters should now spawn properly, which is a relief if those scripted moments felt like they were breaking on you. And dragon ships now properly replenish their units when in the correct stance. There are also fixes around patronage capacity displays, a bunch of UI corrections, and even improvements to how certain co-op partner mechanics behave when playing as Iceland, so no more weirdness where your ally gets stuck on a garrison screen. Norsca players also got a suite of fixes, from correct physical resistance bonuses applying to certain units, to fixes for legendary hero missions that weren't triggering properly, and improvements to how monster arcanum markers spawn near settlements, so they aren't unfairly interfering with your campaign progress. The folks playing as Nurgle had a couple of tech tree tweaks so that certain technologies now also affect the units they were supposed to all along, which helps keep their roster feeling more cohesive and consistent. And while there was a point in the beta where Nurgle army abilities didn't spread properly to nearby friend or foe, that's been corrected, so those effects behave as intended in battle now. Ogres and Skaven both saw some bug fixes that clear up oddities like settlement ownership visibility and actions that wouldn't trigger as expected. So again, quality of life stuff, but hugely helpful when you're trying to plan your next conquest without weird interruptions. Slaanesh had a ton of smaller issues fixed too, from ensuring Eternal Dance doesn't reapply effects after switching back to the original dance, to correcting which building slots get unlocked at various stages of the Pleasure Palace. A bunch of those little corner case behaviors that you might only stumble into once or twice in a long campaign have now been addressed, so they're less likely to feel like bugs when you run into them. There are also fixes for chaos-related factions, like the Warriors of Chaos and Tzeentch, which cover everything from AI building evaluation to avoiding crashes when using certain spell abilities. And even the prologue has some smaller corrections, like making sure the scripted tour triggers properly if a character is wounded, which helps new players get into the game with fewer stumbling blocks. Beyond all of those campaign-specific adjustments, there's a whole section of UI fixes that tighten up how some interfaces behave. One example is fixing the recruitment panel for Save Lords so that it now displays correctly. And another is eliminating a crash that used to happen if you double-clicked the Load Lord button. Reliable UI is something people don't always talk about, but when it's done wrong, it can be a real thorn in your side, so these fixes are really welcome. The update also tackles a bunch of balance changes for battle, and while I won't hit every single one, there are notable adjustments to units across factions. For instance, some units in the Slaanesh roster, like the Dakala and Mask of Slaanesh, have seen cost changes and defense tweaks to rebalance their effectiveness on the field, and even things like Projectile penetration and leadership values on creatures like chimeras were tuned for better balance. Norsca's roster got some cost and deployment limit adjustments on units like Dreadmaws, along with other small stat tweaks to help keep their army compositions feeling fair and competitive. And High Elf characters like Island saw increased charges for certain abilities, giving them more utility in extended fights. On the battlefront too, there are general fixes that improve consistency, like making sure ranged units don't awkwardly rotate while firing, and that settlement battle replays keep wall levels consistent with what's in the campaign. And various fixes to items and abilities ensure effects are being applied correctly, so you're less likely to see weird behavior from spells and equipment. All in all, this patch is a solid step forward in making Total War Warhammer 3 feel more stable, functional, and balanced. You can definitely notice that Creative Assembly has been listening to feedback and prioritizing fixes that matter most to players, from long-standing campaign issues to unit balance and UI clarity. If you've been wrestling with inconsistencies or weird behaviors in your games, this update should make your battles and campaigns feel smoother and more dependable across the board.